as I transition, I'm so thankful for Gabriella Hoffman and Young Voices. You guys have heard me talk about her plenty. She is going to be joining the show, and she actually just popped over, and I'm going to be bringing her over. Good morning, Gabriella. How are you? Welcome to Common Sense America.
Good to be back, Eden. Sorry for being unable to join you yesterday. My client workload got really stressed, but today's a little lighter. So happy to join you today to break down what is happening with small businesses.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it very much. And you know what? I said to the show earlier, it happens a lot, but the thing is, it's okay. We have so much to talk about, and this show is so supportive of what you do, and we're really grateful for that. I had shared with our audience yesterday and also today, and you know what I'm finding? A lot of women that watch the show are independents, they are freelancers, they're small business owners, they are in media and doing freelance work similar to what you do, similar to what I've been doing. And there's a lot of women tuning in and excited to hear what you can bring to the table with regards to what is happening. And I talked about the 64.6 million freelancers workforce right now, the growth. And we also talked, and I also did that quick quote that you highlighted from the Biden Department of Labor. So can you give us a breakdown of what is ahead for us? What is ahead for the freelancer, the small business owner, the independent contractor?
I wish it were more positive news for our workforce, but I am not so much in the private sector. I think the private sector and reasonable people agree that the workforce is changing. There's going to be a lot more flexible options. You're going to have remote options even. A lot of people have come to grips, even traditional employers, to say, well, to keep and retain workers, we have to make certain accommodations. And among those accommodations, they want to hire contractors, not because they're getting some sort of, cheaper deal. You may pay fewer in expenses because you're not covering Social Security and Medicare when you are hiring contractors, for instance. But it's not because of that. It's because they realize that independent workers, even in a traditional setting, tend to be, more motivated. They tend to have multiple skills. They're not just limited in what they can do. And so all across the board, whether people are independently partaking in the freelance workforce or they're working on a contract basis, even in a traditional work setting, everyone has come to grips. The private sector, for the most part, has come to grips. It's academia. It's those on the center left, unfortunately, in many regards. Not everyone, but many. And others who say, well, we can't have this because workplace settings are really bad still. I think a lot of people in labor politics in the public sector union space unfortunately believe that exploitation is running rampant. Are there cases where there's misclassification? Of course, that happens, but there are laws already on the books to address that. However, most people feel like they're not being heard in the independent workforce. We keep telling people, not just me, but plenty others. They say this in various different polls. They say this to various different people. Unfortunately, there is a narrative in the media to kind of quash independent workforce perspectives because they say, well, gig workers, like I was seeing something on MarketWatch, excuse me. And they were saying that this gig economy expert doesn't seem to have any proximity to the issue or to the workforce, was saying that, well, people are choosing to use this type of arrangement to skirt tax law. And I'm like, I don't use this to skirt tax law. I'm paying more in taxes. What are you talking about? So I'm not the only person with that. So I'm wanting to give an overall sense of the trends. So we have obstacles through regulators, and people who like to shape opinion and the pulse of the country. However, I think the private sector, a lot of politicians, largely on the center right, and a couple moderate Democrats, do want to see this workforce flourish. And I think when people see what is on the horizon economically with inflation, just with people getting disoriented with the traditional workforce and wanting to have more freedom, it's a great arrangement, like you said, for women, especially for men too, but for women who want to balance family life and career, because you could do that these days and you could still be a good mother, good wife, and also still maintain a career. I think it's healthy to want to juggle both. It's not a bad thing to want to achieve that balance. I want to achieve that balance myself, personally speaking. And so a lot of young women view it the same way. And it's a pro-family policy. What greater way to empower people, especially women, to be able to choose when to work and when not to work? You can work on a part-time basis, full-time basis. If you have kids, toddlers, infants, you could take time off, set aside for rearing your children, however best you need to, whatever is best according to your needs. There's no other type of policy like that, in my estimation, that is so attractive to people if it's just talked about more. Now let's talk about the regulatory component. The Biden administration, like I had mentioned, President Biden is beholden to unions. and the union workforce is languishing compared to the freelance workforce. So the union workforce is maybe 10.3% of the total US workforce of the 164 million who work. It's a tiny fraction. And that's because it's not because people are like, well, we hate unions, we hate this or whatever. People have become very disillusioned by unions because unions unfortunately give to one party. They're not seen as kind of this change maker entity, and workers see that they can negotiate salaries and get their own benefits without a union. You don't need a third party entity. You're your best negotiator today.
Exactly.
And so you don't really need a third party entity or a liaison in the form of a union to advocate for your best interests in the workplace. You shouldn't have to, because greed breeds from that type of arrangement. People in those entities get very greedy. They want to take your money to go towards dues paying members, even if you don't want to have any part in the political framework of a union. And so people are moving away from that because they see, let's say in education, unions have way too much control over the output of educational policies, of textbooks, and the conversation that happens in the classroom. They have way too much oversight, way too much involvement, and it's led to kids having diminished returns on their testing and on their performance in elementary, middle, and even high school and college too, arguably speaking. So when you see what they've done in the education space, we don't need any more entanglements in the business space. And so workers, even unionized workers, there's different scholarship that has come out from, I think it was published from University of Michigan. I forget the exact institution, but it was a reputable institution published in Forbes magazine. And they were saying that even unionized workers, much like non-unionized workers, enjoy a better quality of life, more economically prosperous in right to work states. So the evidence is there. Unfortunately, we're going against a media that is heavily biased in favor of unionizing. They're talking about this unionizing moment. And the president and his administration, his labor department, refuse to acknowledge independent workers. They say, well, this is growing, but we're going to favor this 10.3%, not this 39% of the workforce now. It grew from 36 to 39% in the past year, which is an amazing gain.
It is.
And so this independent contractor rule that closes, the comment period closes on the 13th of December of this month, so within a week. It's an extremely important rule to pay attention to. There have been a lot of comments. I would say most of the comments, from what I can extrapolate, have been against the proposed rule. So going back and forth, I think there's been back and forth, rather, in this discussion about should you blanket statement label every worker as an employee and make it increasingly difficult for independent workers to prove that they are. This stems many decades, but in the most recent iteration, the Obama administration, towards the tail end of that second term, they put in two rules, the joint employer rule, and they also put in this rewriting of independent contractor rules to assume that most workers are traditional employees. But if you look at the trends, you look at even people's self-perceived behaviors of whether or not they're independent contractors. You talk to independent contractors, gig workers themselves, even Uber and Lyft drivers, they overwhelmingly, in most recent estimations, I think the Pew Research poll, The State of Gig Work, it's a really great comprehensive report, came out in December of last year. It said that worker self-perceptions, it was even greater, that a higher percentage, a little bit, like 62%, 64% of self-perception of gig workers, they view themselves as independent contractors, not employees. And then when they pulled the general populace, it was maybe like 61, 62 that viewed that this is how we perceive Uber, Lyft, and independent contractors. So the public, when you present them kind of unfiltered or unbiased, let's say, methodology about the gig work, gig economy rather, they see that most of them like to be independent. A lot of them, I mean, you can anecdotally even say this. Who hasn't been in an Uber ride? And again, Uber and Lyft drivers, I would say, are a small share of the independent contractor workforce. I think a lot of them would be, there's so many terms and categorizations. So freelancers can be viewed as all of us can be independent contractors, but there's a level of independent contracting you do. So I'm a full-time independent contractor. There are people who are part-time, and there are people who are occasional. A lot of the Uber and Lyft drivers would probably fit into the part-time or occasional positions. Some of them do it full-time, but I would say a large share probably are part-time or occasional independent contractors. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because people are choosing to do this. And anecdotally, I think maybe I've ridden in a couple dozen Ubers, and I think I've heard other people say this too. And most of them, when pressed upon this question, they say, yes, I love doing this. Is it perfect? No, but it gives me independence, and I like it. And I don't want to have this ability to do this encroached upon.
Right.
And then when rulemakers in the Biden administration and in individual states like California say, well, we know the best interest of workers, you guys are going to like this. And then, like we talked about previously, in California, they tried this before. They tried AB5 as a model legislation. It had very deleterious results. Millions of independent contractors who were full-time professionals lost work. Some of them lost contracts altogether and had to move out of California.
Right.
But a lot of people have had diminished workloads and they're not happier, or they've had to take on full-time work again as a traditional employee because of the stipulations of AB5, making it harder in tax law, or rather in the eyes of California's Labor Department, rather, to prove that you are an independent contractor. You have to meet 3 prongs to say you are an independent contractor. But the way that they apply that test is very strident. It's very stringent, very difficult in terms of doing it. So they've had to create exemptions for different professions, and then they haven't given exemptions to everyone, of course. And the voters of California overwhelmingly put a correction with Proposition 22, and then it's being held in the courts. So even in California, which is very far left, they understand the importance of the gig economy. The gig economy largely was born out of Silicon Valley. All these tech companies came from there. But self-employment in the form of full-time independent contracting has been around for at least since the country's creation. It's been around since business practices were first practiced. And so it's really mind-boggling to me that this administration does not recognize where the economic trends are going. They're trying to go against progress. They love to talk about we're for progress, we're for this, we want, to champion workers.
Complete opposite.
It absolutely is. And so they're not safeguarding worker freedom. They love to say they're for workers. They're for a very select few workers. And I would even think among the unionized workforce, they're not happy with what unions do for themselves either. So nobody wins with this type of obtuse rulemaking that the Biden administration is experimenting with. On the other dimension, it's not just independent contractors who work, let's say, like in specialized professions like me. It's people who own franchises.
Yes.
Who work with franchise companies. Like I said, this joint employer rule, the comment period just ended. And they want to make it harder for free franchisers to not be liable, or rather franchise companies, they want to hold them liable for things maybe that franchisees do, which would put so many burdens on the businesses. It also give a bad name to the franchisees. It's a complicated mess. I would encourage your readers to look into that. I have some scholarship at Independent Women's Forum on this. I've written about this. I'm forgetting a little bit of the specifics about the joint employer rule, but both of these have been tried before. And there have been court rulings to stop those rules from proceeding, from being implemented, because the judges have found that this goes against existing labor law, that this restricts people's ability to work how they please, and that it's an archaic model. It's not of the times. People want these flexible arrangements. They want to be their own bosses. I know that's cliche to say, but they want to be their own bosses because it's more fulfilling. Maybe you have a very bad boss in a traditional work setting. Perhaps you have horrible coworkers. I never had that. No workplace is perfect, of course. I had a great workplace. I probably am in the exception. But a lot of people have complained to me. They've said, I want to pursue freelancing because I had a horrible boss, or I had horrible coworkers, or I was facing sexual harassment. Something, unpleasant was happening in the workplace. So a lot of people, I wouldn't say that's the primary driving force. Like, I had a horrible workplace, therefore I need to be a freelancer. But that is one motivating factor.
It is.
I think it's largely because people are saying, I could do better. I could get more revenue. I could make more money. I could determine my schedule. I think those are the sticking points, rather than I hated my workplace, therefore I'm changing it. But I think there have been 3 things before I let you ask me some more questions, of course. So we heard at the beginning of COVID, there's the Great Resignation.
Right.
Everyone was forecasting its, bad qualities. It's horrible. It's going to upend the workforce. Then we moved to the Great Reshuffling, and people are kind of more receptive to that. Now we're in the, Great Realignment. I think that's what they're calling it.
Yeah.
And this is now more positively viewed among workers, employers. They see like, okay, maybe there was some struggles in the beginning. We didn't understand what this means. But now that trends are proving that people are choosing this is perfectly acceptable, perfectly normal. There's nothing for us to be alarmed about, and we can adjust and we can make these necessary changes. So the private sector has made this change, and this is being overwhelmingly welcomed by most people. It's just rulemaking and lawmakers have not gotten to speed with this, unfortunately. And this is what always happens. The government could be behind, or they could be forever altering the
Right.
course of something that is, I mean, look what they're doing to crypto. They found a scapegoat in this crazy person who shouldn't have had so much access to money. He was reckless. He was irresponsible. He was a privileged kid of professors who was very well connected to Democrats. And they want to tear down cryptocurrency, which should be decentralized. I don't dabble in cryptocurrency, but I understand the merits to it. And I understand
Right.
the true believers who dabble in Bitcoin and say, like, this individual is being used to tarnish the whole industry at large. And so they want to find scapegoats and say, well, there's misclassification here. The small businesses, they're trying to rewrite workers as independent contractors versus employees to skirt tax law or to skirt paying their taxes. So you can't make isolated incidences generalizations of what
Right.
is happening, especially if evidence is showing that more and more workers are voluntarily choosing to leave a 9-to-5 job
Yes.
for these settings.
Yes. Well, one thing that really stands out to me, I don't have the article in front of me, but I was reading it this morning. Katie Couric actually talked a little bit about this as well. And she highlighted that this space is heavily women, heavily female. And the other thing, one thing I wanted to ask you, two things I wanted to ask you in this space, and then we'll head over to commercial fishing because I know there's people that want to hear about that too. What will our taxes look like, in coming into next year as we prepare for our taxes? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is I think about our military spouses. I think about our veteran spouses. And the military spouses are constantly moving, constantly in transition. And this is one of the most ideal opportunities for them is to be freelancers, is to have a small business and not be so dependent on where their spouse is going next, knowing that they can be international and have a thriving business. And for all the senators and even the president himself to be such a support to, quote, our military, but yet have to give tax incentives to small businesses to hire spouses, there's a real issue here. And I just want to awaken that giant and stir that pot and say our spouses need to be at the very forefront of this because they are always underemployed and they don't want to be underemployed anymore. They want to have these opportunities. But yet, if we continue to put tax burdens on them that the Biden Department of Labor would like to do, we have a greater issue here. And, like I said, as we are looking at the gas prices, looking at the food prices, and looking at the economic crisis that the Biden administration has put us in, not Trump, you can stop blaming Trump now. He's no longer in office, Mr. Biden. I say, freelancing and independent consultant is the way to go. So we don't have to spend 2 hours being cussed at in the DC Beltway. That's just my example because I lived that. I lived that for too long. And being able to work from home and serve my family, but also serve my constituents and my businesses and also the people that watch this podcast, I'm able to do that with not having to sit in 2-hour traffic going one way. So that's my rant for that. But my questions to you are, what do we need to be thinking ahead in regards to the tax season? And then what can we do for the military spouse to encourage them to pursue being freelancers and independent consultants?
I saw a graphic from the Tax Foundation recently, and I want to pull it up. I think I saw the breakdown of how the new rules are going to be, or what income bracket is going to have to pay what percentage. And I think in the income bracket I'm supposed to be in, I think I saw that I'm going to pay 22% in taxes. And that's even before I pay my self-employment tax, which is 15%. So I'm going to probably have to fork over a lot of money. I had a really good year for my client work. So, I mean, naturally, of course, you have to pay more in taxes, unfortunately, but we do need to reform the progressive income tax structure. I totally believe that. But I'm going to be paying more in taxes. The more, if you have been fortunate to make more money, the break, I think it's going to be 5 or 7 percentage levels. So they're going to look to even get middle income people more on the tax codes. And additionally, you had alluded to my article, I think, and you wanted to bring me on originally about this 1099K filing.
Yes.
A lot of people have been talking about this. This hasn't been an exactly new news story. It's been kind of on the back of people's minds since the American Rescue Plan was passed last spring, in spring of 2021. And it's starting to come to people's realization that this is going to have very deleterious effects on people. So the people who are largely engaged in these kind of casual selling apps, these third-party apps that they're looking to, activate a 1099K form on for $600 that you rake in. These are people who are typically not making a livelihood off of this. Some people maybe. I think a majority of them are probably making somewhere between $5,000 a year using casual selling, unless they're really at it and able to rake in a lot of profit. That would be cool if someone was able to make six figures. I'm not sure. I haven't really done much research into, or really much experimentation into casual selling market, although I understand the principle of it and why people choose to do it. It's much like freelancing.
Yeah.
But I was watching Fox News at night a little bit, and they were saying how this would affect gig workers. So these people are, in a sense, occasional gig workers for the most part, or occasional independent contractors, because they're not doing this full time. They're making a really small denomination of money. And if someone is trying to get by, with the side project, this is a side hustle, and perhaps they want to turn the side hustle into a full-time thing, as their little casual marketplace gets more interest, gets more revenue, gets more income. It is a good starting point, much like with freelancing. Freelancing allows you to go from a one-person business to maybe starting a brick and mortar shop to maybe starting a big business. The potential with these casual sellers is the same too. It's kind of one of the last vestiges of true, pure, unadulterated entrepreneurship. And so with them wanting to activate a 1099K form for $600 for, let's say, maybe you sold concert tickets to someone, or perhaps you took this in. It's unfair to these people for such a small denomination of money. It previously used to be 20,000 for 20,000 for like 200 transactions. I think that was the case. What the previous law would be. But this has actually triggered even opposition by Democrats. There were some Democrats from more modern areas, especially New Hampshire. New Hampshire's delegation, which is largely Democrat in Congress, was saying we need to up this money. We need to up this threshold back to a higher threshold, like 5,000. That was one compromise they reached. Some of them support moving it to 20,000. Republicans have two bills to move the reporting threshold for 1099K filings back to 20,000. And I think most people would like to see it like that, given what impact this will have in the new tax season. It started to go into effect, I think, December 31st last year, but people are really going to see it from this previous tax cycle into filing taxes in the spring, because that's when the law truly went into effect. And people will see, not only are they going to have to, fork over taxes, but a lot of people are very concerned about the privacy invasion that this invites. It's going to give the government unfettered access to people who they don't really have to have on their radar. I think government has too much information on people regardless, but these small casual sellers, could you imagine if, let's say, maybe they said the wrong opinion or something, and they could be like, well, let's target this casual seller because they were engaged in wrong thing. Or maybe this casual seller is deceptive in their tax filings. Why are they doing this? Are they hiding money? So this could give the IRS grounds. And they're going to be getting what? 87,000 new employees to compensate for the 8.4 billion that they've lost in revenue, according to them. It's just, people just don't have a need for these workers. To be honest, I think people are just, the IRS had to be, I remember the Trump administration shrinking that workforce because it was too bloated. That's understandable. And so they're like, well, we need to hire back this number of employees. That gives the government way too much oversight over tax filings. And being fearful of the IRS does not make you a criminal. I don't evade paying taxes. I think everyone tries to find little breaks and write-offs. It's perfectly legal. It's not anything problematic. But if you're, offshore account, that's a whole nother story. If you're trying to skirt taxation and not pay any taxes, I think that's a problem too. But I think most people are honest. They show what they're going to be paying in their tax. And this creates, again, just a burden on people who shouldn't have to pay for this, or have to worry about their private information being accessible in this degree. It's just so unconscionable to me that they even believe this. But, that's just where we are with politics. Unfortunately, the left, the modern left, will try to squeeze any penny out of any individual because they believe that to make money, you've had to have exploited someone along the way. Unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I want to switch topics knowing that we just have a few minutes left. I know I had was really promoting the whole commercial North Carolina commercial fishing piece, which is huge here in Eastern North Carolina, but also which is huge across the state, as it pertains to the fact that I will say we have an empty seat at the helm of the regime of North Carolina. And we do have a legislature that is Republican. But I question Republican in name only by how they are putting all these rules and regs on commercial fishermen who are also entrepreneurs, also businessmen, also generation after generation after generation of those who have given to especially Eastern North Carolina. And I'd mentioned to them how you may be coming here early next year. I want you to talk a little bit about your show and what you're doing, but also talk to the point of what do you see on the horizon for the commercial fishermen from the business standpoint, as you have been very much knee deep in this topic?
Yeah, will keep my remarks brief for your question. But a lot of people who run shrimp boats or lobster boats or operations, they're all independent operators.
Mm-hmm.
There is unfortunately division among commercial and recreational fishers, but I think these two camps are going to come together because both are being unfairly regulated out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And even beyond your state of North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
there's an issue percolating in Maine. It has been brewing for a while. I just realized that, of course, the Biden administration wants to regulate lobster fishing, and they are doing it. And I totally overlooked this because there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving stories. But I wanted to wait to see before saying, well, the Biden administration is implicated in this. They're causing the demise of the lobster industry. And now there actually is evidence. It was issued early in his administration in the Commerce Department. They have called for, I would say, reducing the lobster catch by 98%. And there's not only lobstering, it's 5 or 6 other industries. I need to go back and see. But I think largely commercial fishing enterprises are affected by this because they say it adversely affects the environment. It's going to ruin natural spaces, and we need to protect this from that. And an issue I brought up last time is the North Atlantic endangered right whale.
Mm-hmm.
And some new scholarship recently came out about it. And I know the commercial fishermen in your state and all across the Eastern Seaboard have raised a lot of alarms about kind of the vessel rules that are going to be adopted by the Commerce Department, most likely. Just the other different regulations imposed on them, preventing them from being able to do their livelihood. My understanding, having befriended people in the commercial sector too, in addition to working and participating in the recreational sector,
right,
these people adhere to the strictest environmental standards. You cannot have a boat without having it updated, having the proper gear, making sure you abide by the strictest of regulations possible. These people are regulated to the 10th degree. I think there's no more industry regulated than that. Maybe the firearms industry and a couple others like that, where there are a lot of regulations that go into business production and operation. But these people, they are conservationists. They've been conservationists before it was cool. And they have to go through the ringer to have to be able to maintain their livelihood because certain radical preservationists, these are modern day environmentalists, but I call them preservationists because they like to distort what conservation is. They're not conservationists because that's a wise management of natural resources, not no management. And they view human involvement as a negative thing. We can have a positive impact on the landscape, and commercial fishermen, lobstermen have had a positive impact. With respect to the right whale, lobstermen have ensured to work that their gear is not entangling the whale. There have been very few entanglements attributed to lobstermen and that industry in the last 20 years because they've taken precautions to prevent that. However, they are still blamed for the right whale's predicament and for the plight of that endangered whale. My thinking is this whale has the most, restrictions placed on it, or rather protections placed on it. It has endangered protections, threatened protections from the Endangered Species Act, and also the Marine Mammal Life Protection Act. So the two strictest standards to ensure that this can be, this species in particular cannot go extinct. That's what the law is intended to do. But the problem is the whale's plight is not improving. It's not getting better even with these restrictions. I'm not calling for whaling, but these laws are not being executed properly to ensure that the species regenerates, and they're finding scapegoats who are actually willing participants who want to help the whale improve its status. But even on the other side of the pendulum, this whale actually faces a real threat from offshore wind. A new report, a FOIA request was put out by Bloomberg Energy. And Bloomberg, say what you will, I'm not a fan of Michael Bloomberg, but sometimes his news outlet actually does great reporting work. And they were able to obtain information from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, one of the scientists there, who said, you have to be Department of Interior, Biden Department of Interior. You need to be aware of this. Your pursuing of this large-scale wind production all across the East Coast is going to impact this endangered whale. So it remains to be seen if they're going to listen to their own scientists. It's easy to blame vessels. It's easy to blame lobstermen. It's easy to blame commercial fishermen when you are ignoring the real potential problem on the horizon. Kind of these unmanaged big scale projects, which are not largely efficient, and they affect marine ecosystems. They affect migration patterns. And it's not because we're neophytes or we want to oppose progress. I'm all for environmental progress. I'm a conservationist. I go fishing and hunting. I spend a lot of time outdoors. But the thing is, these projects cannot replace fossil fuels. And what impact are they going to have on the landscape? Everyone talks about, conventional oil and gas sources having deleterious effects on the environment. But anytime you have, let's say, a coal field, if you have a reclaimed coal field, that reclaimed coal field can be used for elk and deer habitat. They feed there because it's nutrient rich. Can you say the same for a decommissioned solar or wind farm? I don't think so. The initial studies that have come out about when those become decommissioned, and they don't really reach their full potential short life. They're very costly. They have high upfront costs. And can they be done on a smaller scale? Absolutely. But do we need to have dozens and dozens of them on the coastline when they're not necessarily efficient? Maybe the people advocating for them have wrongly talked up their benefits and have not taken into account their costs and their disadvantages. That remains to be seen. And for people to call themselves conservationists and not worry about its impact on the whale or other marine wildlife, it goes to show they're hypocrites. They really don't care about the environment.
Yeah, sounds like politics. Tell us where we can watch and listen into your podcast. And for all of them out there who are tuning in, tell us what you got over Thanksgiving.
Oh, I didn't get anything over Thanksgiving. No. I'm still awaiting venison that I got in October. It's being processed. The event organizers are going to send that to me very soon. I normally can process, but since we had a big party, they offered to process our venison. But I have some venison coming, and I should be going deer hunting again in the coming week or two. After a client event I have to do in New York City, which should be fun. And then I'm going to do some fly fishing more so. But follow me at District of Conservation podcast. I'm actually going to be going into depth about Biden's policies affecting lobstering this week. And I had a great interview with one of my friends who's a Florida conservationist that I posted yesterday all over social media. Find my writings at Town Hall, Independent Women's Forum, and everywhere. Thank you for having me, Eden.
Thank you, Gabriella. Always love having you here. Thank you for joining Common Sense America. We look forward to seeing you soon. And please keep us up to date in the North Carolina commercial fishing piece, because I know a lot of, including my husband, are very curious as to what's going to be ahead. So thank you so much.
Look forward to coming next year. It's going to be fun.
It is. Have a great Tuesday. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriella. Bye-bye. For all those who are tuning in, this is Common Sense America. I am Eden Hill. Make sure you go to my YouTube channel and check out Common Sense America with Eden Hill. And if you missed any of this episode today, you can find it on Rumble. You can go to Eden Gordon Media. Go to all my social channels. I love talking with you. I love hearing your comments. We have some great new guests coming in tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. Moms for America will be here at 9:30. Also, Jonathan E. Moore, the authoritarian author, and also constitutional law attorney. We're going to be breaking it down for you. All of you who care about your kitchen table family, your kitchen table discussions, right here every day, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Come join us here at Common Sense America. Be strong, be courageous, walk powerfully on that journey that God has called you to. For such a time as this, go and do that amazing work today. I'll see you tomorrow.